Back on chess.com making another video on the dragon for you guys, and today we're going to talk about the Chinese dragon, which is a very exciting variation, as would be expected with the dragon. So we'll go through the opening moves, where we get the mainline dragon position after black plays g6, and here we're going to continue with the Yugoslav attack. I just think it's by far the most important thing for a dragon player to know. We'll do some videos later on sidelines that white can play, but the Yugoslav attack is just infinitely more dangerous, so I think it deserves most of our attention. So bishop e3, bishop g7, f3, either castles or knight c6. And here, black can play the Chinese dragon against the bishop c4 variation. He can't play it if white castles queenside in this position or plays g4, which are lines we've covered in other videos. But here we're going to talk about bishop c4, after which black replies bishop d7 and white castles. And we've seen in this position where black plays rook c8, which is one of the main moves, but if black wants to play the Chinese dragon, the move is rook b8. So this move looks a little bit counterintuitive, putting the rook behind the b pawn, but the idea is that oftentimes in this position, the black queenside pawns are going to explode forward. You're going to play b5, a5, and have a very powerful attack with the pawns. And even if you don't include the a pawn in your attack, that b pawn is always going to b5 in these positions, and the rook will find use along the b file. So after rook b8, there's two main moves that white can play. He can play h4, shamelessly starting his attack, or white can play bishop b3, which is a little bit more of a prophylactic move. So let's start with h4. After h4, black has two options. He can play knight a5, kicking the bishop back to b3, and then play b5. If black plays like this, it's going to transpose to the other line where white plays bishop b3 instead of playing h4. So black has this option. He can always play this line. But when white starts with h4, black has another option. He can trade the knight on d4. Knight takes knight, bishop takes knight, and then go b5. And here we see the point of the rook on b8, supporting the pawn on b5, and black's going to get a strong attack out of this. White usually will bring the bishop back to b3, but I want to show you quickly what can happen if he goes bishop e2. Here black plays a strong move, queen a5. A very typical attacking move in the dragon. Nothing too surprising here. And black is threatening to play b4 and kick the knight, and then take the pawn on a2. So every time I've had this position for black, my opponents always play king b1. It looks natural, but king b1 is no free pass for white in this position. Black's playing b4, and the only square for white's knight is to go into d5. And after this, black has a great position. He takes the knight on d5. Now, if white wants to try to get tricky and play bishop takes g7, black has an excellent resource here. He doesn't need to recapture the bishop, but rather he can go knight c3 check, which is a devastating move, just crushing white in this position. If he takes with the pawn, pawn takes pawn check with the rook, attacking the queen, and also guaranteeing mate very soon. And if white takes with the bishop, still pawn takes pawn, attacking the queen. The queen cannot capture on c3 because black will simply capture on c3 with his queen, exploiting the pin on the b file, and white is toast here. He would have to move his queen away, in which case rook takes b2 check, and any number of things here. For example, rook b1 check is a forced mate. So, taking on g7 would not be wise. White has to recapture on d5, but now black can happily win the pawn with queen takes d5. And if bishop takes g7 here, you can simply go to the endgame of pawn up and enjoy a great position. Good chances to win this endgame. However, some people here will not cut their losses, but rather attempt to win the pawn back with bishop takes a7. And this is not a good idea. It's always very risky to play a move like this in the dragon, opening up the a file and wasting time. And here black can punish white by playing a very nice move, queen to a5, sacrificing the exchange on b8. After bishop takes b8, black doesn't need to recapture right now. He has a nice move, bishop e6, threatening to go queen takes a2 check, which will lead to mate on a1. White needs to play here either b3 or a3, something to stop the threat, and now black can simply recapture on b8 with a devastating attack. So many nice possibilities in this position. Ideas like bishop c3 in some positions, maybe queen a4, and then taking on a3. White won't last more than 5 moves in this position. So after b5, a better move is to go bishop b3. Usually the white bishop belongs on this diagonal, and it's much better placed there. But after bishop b3, now a5 is a nice idea for black, because he's threatening to trap the bishop by pushing a4, kicking the bishop into d5, and then playing e6, after which the light square bishop will be trapped. So white needs to find a way to parry this threat. He could play a3, but black is going to have a very good attack after simply b4, opening up white's king position. White might also sometimes play a4 in this position, but this move simply fails tactically. This would be a good chance here to pause the video and try to find the winning tactical shot for black. Black can take over this position with a series of forcing moves. He can start by capturing on a4, and it doesn't matter how white recaptures, because either way, black is going to capture on a4 with his bishop, and the white piece that ends up on a4 is just going to be dead in the water. So for example, knight takes a4, bishop takes a4, bishop takes a4, and now one more, forcing continuation, knight takes e4. White will take back with his pawn, bishop takes on d4, queen takes on d4, and finally rook b4, forking the queen and the bishop, in which case black will win the bishop on a4, have an extra pawn, and a great position. So that's why white usually plays bishop b3 in this position instead of h4, because he doesn't want to allow black the opportunity to trade on d4 and push b5 with gain of tempo. All those variations lead to a strong attack for black. So bishop b3 here is the most common move. And now it's not quite as easy for black to trade and play b5, because here I think the bishop can grab that pawn on a7 because it's with tempo attacking the rook. Certainly, black will have some compensation with open lines on the queen side, but he has to waste a tempo move in the rook, and then the bishop can return to d4, where it can try to block black's dragon bishop on the diagonal. And I think white is fine here. This bishop on b3 is very strong. It can't be attacked, and here it supports white's queen side very well. And I think white is doing pretty well in this position. So it's not easy for black to use the same idea here, but after bishop b3, here the main idea for black is knight a5, with two ideas. One idea is in certain positions it's possible to trade the knight off for the bishop, but also black has an idea to go b5. In this line, he's always going to try to play b5, and then to go knight c4 and trade the knight for the bishop, and then recapture on c4 with his pawn, which will then open the b file for the black rook. And we're going to see this idea in action. So white has two main moves here. He can play bishop h6, immediately trying to trade the dark square bishops, or he can play h4 and start his attack. Let's start by looking at the h4 line, and then we'll see the bishop h6 move in a little bit greater detail, as we're going to see a recent game in this line. So after h4, black goes b5. Very natural. White goes h5, and here it's not good for black to take on h5 with the knight. White's attack will become too strong. Black instead needs to attack himself here by playing knight to c4. So knight c4, the bishop needs to take because the queen and bishop are being forked, so bishop takes, pawn takes, and now pawn takes on g6. And this might be another good opportunity to pause your videos and think about a key decision that black needs to make here. He needs to capture the pawn on g6, but with which pawn should he take? Think about it. In this position, it's correct to capture with the f-pawn. Capturing with the h-pawn, while possible in some dragon positions, in this position would not be good at all. After bishop h6, white's attack is very powerful with the open h-file. So in this position, it's necessary to capture with the f-pawn. This allows the rook to go to f7 and sometimes act as a perimeter defender if need be. And also, as you're going to see, there's another reason behind capturing with the f-pawn and vacating the f7 square. So white continues very naturally with bishop h6 and queen a5. In this position, we don't take on h6. Queen a5. Bishop takes, king takes, and now the point is this. Queen h6 check can now be met by king f7. Because when white brings his knight to d5 to try to distract the knight on f6, white won't be able to take on f6 with check. For example, if white played queen h6 check, king g8, knight d5, black doesn't have time to take on a2 here because he's going to get mated. Takes the knight, and then queen takes on h7 is crushing. So the point is to have the ability to put the king on f7 in this position where it's actually safer. So if white goes knight to d5 here, black can simply play queen takes a2, and after queen h6 check, surprise, surprise, not king g8, but rather king f7, the king is very safe, and black's attack is very powerful. White doesn't have time to take this knight, because now black just wins the house with his queen. Queen takes b2 check, he takes on d4 with check, he captures the knight, and black has an easily winning position with an extra piece. So let's talk about the line with bishop h6, and let's see a game here. So in this game, white is Andrei Zhigalko, a very strong player, and black is the famous Chinese GM Bu Zhengzi, who very often has played the dragon. So their opening moves are the same as what we're used to, mainline dragon position. And Bu Zhengzi elects to go with the Chinese dragon. I guess not too big a surprise considering that he's from China. So rook b8, and Zhigalko played bishop d3. Knight a5, and now not h4, which we just discussed, but rather here we're going to see the alternative line, bishop h6. And here, in this position, the best idea is to capture the bishop and immediately pull the queen into h6, kind of distracting white's queen from defending the queen side in the center. So black's hope is that white's queen will be out of play on h6. Of course, it's a double-edged sword because white can have a very powerful attack. But black has shown that with accurate play, he's absolutely fine in this position. So here, black trades the bishops, and now black has to play very actively. So he starts by playing b5. White goes h4, very aggressive, and pawn to e5, attacking the knight. Knight goes back to e2, now another forcing move, pawn to b4. Black is controlling the pace of the game. White's knight needs to come into d5, and now very important, he captures the bishop on b3 first. You would not want to capture the knight on d5 and allow white's bishop to come to that amazing square on d5, where black's knight on a5 is practically useless. So very important, first capture on b3 with check. White takes back with the a-pawn, and now takes on d5. White takes back with the rook, and bishop e6. So black has played very forcing for the last 5 moves, but now white says, you know what, it's my turn. I know you want me to move my rook, but I'm going to play h5. Because here, it's not possible for black to take the rook. After h takes g6, black is getting mated. The attack on the h-file is very dangerous. But black comes up with a very nice idea for a perimeter defense. This would be a good chance to pause the video and see if you can find a good move for black in this position.
Queen f6. It has rook takes, I don't know.
Bu Zhengzi played rook to b7. The idea being that after pawn takes g6, black can simply take back with the f-pawn, and his rook is guarding h7. It's a very nice perimeter defense.
What a move.
Queen c7 is also a playable move in this position. This has been played before. I played this move myself before in this position, queen c7. But Zhengzi plays rook b7, and now white plays a very interesting move, very creative. Rook to b5. He's willing to give up a whole rook to distract black's rook from the 7th rank. If rook takes rook again, pawn takes g6, and that mate threat is just too powerful. Black cannot survive this position. So it's not possible to take the rook. Rather, black plays queen to c7. The rooks are exchanged, but black has nothing to worry about in this position as long as he has a piece guarding the 7th rank. White goes pawn to g4, and queen e7. Queen e7 is a harmless-looking move, but actually with a dangerous idea in mind. Black is ready to play g5 and try to incarcerate White's queen on h6 for the rest of the game. So Zhigalko sees the threat and withdraws his queen to d2. And now simply a5, protecting the pawn on b4, and preparing sometimes to play a4 and try to break through on the queen side. I think this position is more or less equal and very playable for black. White plays knight g3, trying to bring his knight to the king side. King h8, getting the king off the g-file in case White ever plays knight f5 or something like that to try to open up the g-file. The king's a little bit safer here on h8. So White goes back, knight f1, maybe trying to bring the knight to e3 and into the center. But black is very quick here with his attack. He goes rook a8, preparing a4. King d1, White decides it's time to evacuate the queen side. d5, very nice move. Now if White takes on d5, black can simply recapture with the bishop, opening up the position and not fearing queen takes d5 because of rook d8 with a pin. So after d5, White played queen h2, targeting the pawn on e5 with check. Black goes queen c7, defending the pawn. And queen h4, now with the idea to go queen f6 check, and after king g8, to play h6 with a very powerful mating net. Pawn takes pawn. He's not worried, because if queen f6 check, king g8, and h6, he has a very nice move, queen d8 check, taking advantage of the open king on d1, and trading off the queens into a very good endgame for black. So pawn takes e4, very nice move by Zhang Zi. Pawn takes on g6, and now the white attack is getting very powerful. White's threatening queen takes h7 checkmate. If black recaptures with the f7 pawn, now queen f6 check is winning the bishop. So what can black do in this position? How can he survive? Pause your videos, take a look, and try to see. Once again, queen d8 check, forcing a trade of queens, and going to an endgame where black has a good position. White blocks with the knight, the queen's trade, and now simply takes on f3. White takes the pawn with check, rook takes on h7, king g8, and now maybe White could take on f3 with the knight, but after bishop takes g4, it looks like black has a pretty good position. Instead, White goes knight e4, which is kind of a double-edged move, very dangerous to allow black to keep that passed pawn on f3, and ultimately, this led to White's demise in the game. But White is threatening to go knight f6 check, followed by g7 check, and turn the pawn on g6 into a real weapon. So, black plays rook d8 check, king e1, and pawn takes g6, wisely getting rid of the pawn. Still knight f6 check, White's rook and knight coordinate very well, but they really can't do that much by themselves. Black's king is fine on f8, and after rook h8 check, he can simply go king e7. White goes g5, supporting the knight, and bringing his pawn into the attack. But now rook c8 simply, targeting the pawn on c2, and the rook is protected by the bishop. White checks and trades off the rooks in an attempt to hold the endgame after king f2. But black shows that White is already in serious trouble here. Bishop d7, and White can't win any of black's pawns, and the two connected passed pawns are going to prove very menacing. King e3, and king e6, black simply improves his king. White plays c4, what else? He's got to use his c-pawn here as a weapon, but simply king f5. Knight d7, e4, and after c5, he takes the pawn, brings in the king, and after c6, he's not worried, he just sacrifices his bishop, because the three connected black pawns are already way too much for White's knight to handle. Black goes king to g3, preparing to play f2, where making a queen would be unstoppable. So knight to d4, now after f2, he can try knight e2 check. Black goes king g2, knight e6, trying to get the knight active with knight f4 check, but black simply plays g5, and it's the end of the road for White. The knight can't get back into the game. If he takes on g5, simply f2, and black's going to have a queen on the board next move. So White resigns. I hope you enjoyed the game, and I hope it gave you a solid understanding of how the Chinese dragon is a dangerous weapon for black. Thanks for joining me, and stay tuned for future dragon videos.
Okay.
I mean, it's all right.
This motherfucker don't miss.
No, he's fucking good.
That motherfucker don't miss, man.
He's good.
In the heat of battle, he don't miss.
No.
In the heat of controversy, he don't miss.
No.